So is there any other thing you would like to add on maybe radiation safety?
Well, one of the key points and things that Safecast is adamant about is reporting. Okay, if you measure food or you're measuring the environment, don't keep the information to yourself. Okay, the tendency to get some produce and measure it and say, oh, it's below the guidelines, and then just sell it. The person purchasing it actually should have available the information from that test if it was done. If it said it was 20 becquerels per kilogram, which is 1/5 of the most stringent guidelines, and therefore considered, safe to eat, it should still be reported. If you tested it and nothing was detected, that should be reported. Okay, if something was tested and it's close to the guideline, it's still the information should be available regardless of what the results were.
And what about like international testing? Why are you, or why is Safecast interested in collecting international information on radiation around the world?
Well, there's a couple of reasons. One is that one of the big problems with Fukushima was in the first few days, there's radiation out there. I got out a Geiger counter in the days right after the incident, and I could read the level. But one of the questions was, well, is it elevated? Is there more there than there was? And we had no idea because we didn't have information available from even a week previous. So one of the reasons we want to measure worldwide is that when there's an incident somewhere, whether it's an accident at a power plant or a transportation spill or something, we want to have a background or a baseline so that we have a reference to know if there really is contamination. So we have to measure everywhere to get a baseline to determine if there's been a change or an increase. And secondly, we want to measure after the incidents, like in Japan, so that people have information with which to base decisions. It's a huge decision to decide to abandon your home, move, sell your house, and move to a different city. How would you feel if a year after you moved, you found out you'd moved from an area that had less radiation to the place you'd moved to? So you must have a broad amount of information available to make these decisions intelligently and reasonably and avoid making ignorant mistakes.
And in terms of, I think, measurements, like is there any problems that you have encountered in measuring or so far? Or?
There's enormous problems and challenges in measurement. Trying to determine calibration, trying to express to ordinary people the meaning of the different kind of measurements. What's a becquerel? What's a, most people don't know the difference between a becquerel and a bushel. So, and then we hear the units microsieverts and grays and rems, and what do those things mean to a person's health? What do they mean to, how can they decide on those things? And even then, should you count the beta rays, or should you only count gamma? These are things that the scientific community hasn't even sorted out. So we're having a hard time sorting them out too. It's difficult to know exactly what the right answer to all of those questions are.
And in terms of just Fukushima, do you feel resistant from the government, or like, is there anything like they're preventing you from measuring, or?
No, we have had no direct prevention. There were, in the first few months last year, there were some guidelines put out by the government which we felt might have been aimed at us because to beware of these amateur measurements and that they may not be reliable. But we have no direct knowledge that those were aimed at us, and we ignored them.
So are there like official numbers coming out from the government about?
There are official numbers that they were very slow to release their numbers. We think that they had the information and had sat on it for longer than was appropriate. But they have released maps. There are numbers out there. You can debate about how appropriate their numbers are because they tend to measure gamma only. They measure dosages in ways that are traditional but don't take into account the most recent understanding of the potential harm from beta radiation and alpha radiation. We were very concerned at first to make sure that our sensors were sensitive to alpha and beta radiation because we didn't know it was out there. We didn't know. We thought it would be very inappropriate to ignore, essentially blind your sensor to a type of radiation just because you don't want it to contaminate your reading in read-only gamma. It turns out we didn't find any alpha sources in the environment, but at first we didn't know that. But all the government measurements have always been strictly gamma radiation, ignoring the beta, which from cesium is the primary emission. one thing that we often get asked is how do our numbers compare to the government numbers? And we see a very good correlation, okay? Where we find high radiation, the government numbers report high radiation. Where they report it as low, we also find it low. There may be some direct offset because they use a different method than we do, and so they're not directly, our numbers might be 20% different from theirs. But generally, if you were to make a contour map of where the contamination is, what the radiation is, there's a very good correspondence between their numbers and our numbers.